Uh, Ian McDavid, just wanted to know, are you from computer science department? Ian? Hello?
Morning, Dr. Amit.
Hi, Vignesh.
Hi.
1 second. Hello, Ian.
Hello?
Hi. Just wanted to know, are you in computer science department?
The computer science department? I'm in physics right now. I'm a transfer student, and I'm transferring over to computer science
Okay.
next semester.
All right, good. Hi, Vignesh. So, can we put up your main slide
Sure.
so I can capture that? Let's see.
Can you see my slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're delighted here to have the seminar by Vignesh Narayanan. Vignesh got his PhD from Missouri, and then he joined as a postdoc in the Applied Mathematics Lab and Brain Dynamics and Control Research Group in the Department of Electrical and Systems Engineering at Washington University in St. Louis. And from the perspective of, and remember that we are here for the unique interdisciplinary position involving neuroscience and AI. And in that context, we're delighted to have Vignesh. Over to you, Vignesh.
Thank you, Dr. Amit. Good morning to everyone, and thank you all for joining this presentation. I am extremely delighted to give this talk, which is titled Dynamic Learning and Control for Complex Population Systems and Network. So before I begin to present some specific projects, I would start by briefly introducing some of my background or research background. So broadly, dynamical systems and control, computational neuroscience, and artificial intelligence. These three areas form the major thrust of my research. And specifically, under dynamical systems and control, I'm interested in developing fundamental theories and methods for inferring models and synthesizing control signals that can help steer dynamical systems and networks in a desired manner using data. So I have worked on multiple research projects under this thrust area, and they can be broadly categorized into three research themes. So during my doctoral research, I worked on projects that focused on networked dynamical systems. And these are systems that are composed of dynamical units connected with each other through a communication network. And in addition, it may also have physical interactions. So typical examples of this kind of systems include smart grids, wireless sensor networks, transportation systems, and water distribution network. And under this research team, I focus on projects where I develop controllers and design control signals to improve the operational efficiency of these class of systems. And under the second research team, I mainly focus on nonlinear dynamic networks. So typically, these include networks from diverse application domains. For example, epidemic network, social network, neuronal networks, and drug delivery system. And under this research team, I focus on projects where I develop modeling, control, and data analytics methods that can help gain insights into the underlying mechanisms of these dynamical processes. And finally, and more recently, I started working on projects that involve dynamic population systems or ensemble controls. So typical examples of this class of systems include robotic swarms, quantum systems, cellular populations, opinion dynamics, and neural networks. Ensemble systems is a relatively new area in the field of systems and control. As a result, there are very wide open problems with a very exciting applications, both theoretical problems and application problems. And Here in this field, I recently proposed a theoretical framework that can help us study these ensemble systems so that we can perform modeling, analysis, and control tasks associated with these systems. So in the second part of my presentation, I will briefly talk about my proposed ideas to address such problems in these systems. The second thrust area of my research is artificial intelligence. So under this theme, I am interested in building computational tools and algorithms that can help solve learning and control tasks associated with dynamical systems and networks. And this is inevitable, and this is due to the recent advances in Internet of Things, and with the advent of big data and advances in sensing technologies, starting from traditional engineering systems like autonomous vehicle to applications in healthcare and neuroscience. We have sophisticated yet portable devices that can continuously monitor all these dynamical processes, generating large volumes of data. Therefore, it is inevitable that under any application, we need an AI or an intelligent system that can parse through the data to provide us with some actionable knowledge, which can then be used in the next tasks that follows in the pipeline. And under this area, I am interested in developing and employing AI tools, in particular reinforcement techniques and neural networks, computational neural networks, to build intelligent dynamical systems that can monitor themselves, communicate with each other, and self-govern. And finally, the last thrust area of my research involves computational neuroscience. Here I address challenges at the intersection of systems theory and neuroscience. Let me give some context briefly. So understanding brain is a major scientific challenge which prompted Brain Initiative. And I believe dynamical systems and control engineering can contribute to this effort by providing tools and mathematical theories. And under this thrust area, I am interested in projects that can lead to new insights on the underlying mechanisms of pathological conditions of brain, which could result in novel clinical interventions. Or I am also interested in projects that could lead to new insights on mechanisms such as information processing and information representation that can result in efficient and intelligent AI tools. Furthermore, since brain is a very complex system, these investigations can be made at different scales, starting from a very fine scale of molecular and cellular levels to a very coarse scale where we can view the entire brain as a single dynamical system. And in this context, my projects so far have focused on addressing two fundamental questions. One, what are the challenges in inferring dynamic models from a single neuron or a network of neurons? And can we really build reliable models from data? Second, can we safely modulate the spiking activity in a single neuron or a network of neurons? And typically in this thrust area, I employ the theory that I developed from a dynamical systems perspective and use learning tools to realize some of these challenging problems. So in summary, so far, whatever projects that I have worked on, they are rooted to dynamical systems, data engineering, and learning. So wherever there is dynamical systems and some problem associated with control synthesis, learning, or population systems that involves data, I typically develop theories and then try to take it to specific applications where they can be made useful. In addition to this, I have also worked on projects involving data analytics, especially time series data, and I have also developed some computational tools that can help address some of the challenges associated with dynamic data analysis. And in particular, I use or employ all the developed theories and methods and tailor them to applications, in particular to neuroscience applications. And during my doctoral research, I have also worked with some of my graduate students, some of the graduate students from our lab, on developing and implementing some control techniques on robotic test bed. And in all these research projects, I have contributed some new ideas advancing the field, and they have all been published in some of the reputed journals in different fields. So in this presentation, of course, I will not be able to talk about all of these diverse research projects. So I will particularly focus on two projects, which is about inferring dynamic models from data and a study on dynamic population systems or ensemble systems. So my background is dynamical systems theory, and I'm not trained in biology. So I will be presenting all my result from a dynamical systems perspective. And please feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions. And secondly, I will also use a lot of examples from neural systems. However, the developed theory that I present is applicable broadly to diverse domains. And after the two projects, I will summarize some of my other projects and contributions. And I will be very happy to talk about them after the presentation offline. And finally, I'll end with my plans for future research. The first project that I would like to present today is on inferring dynamic models from data. So let me begin by briefly introducing some of the terminologies that I will be using during this presentation. So for example, we will view circuits, neuronal circuits as nonlinear dynamic networks. So by that, what I mean is we have a finite population of interconnected neurons, and we model them with networks where each node in the network represents or models an individual neuron, and the connections between different nodes in the network model how these neurons interact with each other. In particular, I'm interested in building dynamic models of neuron, which tells or informs the time evolution of some physical quantity associated with a neuron. For example, if we want to model the dynamics of the membrane potential of a neuron, we can represent it compactly using a differential equation, which informs how the membrane potential evolves with respect to time as a function of its baseline dynamics, which models the ionic mechanisms confined to the neuron. And also it depends on coupling dynamics, which models how the neuron is affected by other neurons in the network. And finally, it is also affected or modulated by external control input, which models the effect of extrinsic stimulation, which could be an optogenetic stimulation or an electrical signal. Now, the goal of learning or building dynamical models from a dynamical systems perspective is to use data to construct or recover these baseline dynamics and coupling dynamics, given the control or external perturbation and the trajectory, voltage trajectories, for example, in this case. Now, in the following, I'll present one of my projects that I first started working on, and another project on inferring network connections, which will be used to motivate some of the challenges associated with building dynamic models of neural networks. So thanks to the seminal work of Hodgkin and Huxley, we know that the dynamics of a single neuron can be modeled as a function of ionic currents represented with I with the subscript n, and the extrinsic current represented here with I. Right? Now note here, I do not have a coupling dynamics term here because I am only concerned with an individual isolated neuron. Now in their work, Hodgkin and Huxley, they also demonstrated that the ionic currents is a function of gating variables denoted by n with the subscript j, and they showed that these gating variables have their own time evolution captured by some dynamic equation, right? So with this, one of our collaborators asked us, so given the voltage trajectories and the external perturbations or the stimulus that is applied to generate these voltage trajectories, can we say how many channels are present in the neuron? So these channels that are modeled by these gating variables generally are, in simple terms, they mediate the flow of ions in and out of the neuron, right? So the question is, how can we infer how many such channels are present? Then what are the active ionic channels? So these two questions in terms of modeling requires answering these following two questions, which is how many ionic currents are present, and what is the strength of the conductance of each of these channels. Now, this is crucial in some of the clinical and experimental neuroscience problems, because of which our collaborator wanted to have this information from data. Now, this is a challenging problem because the gating trajectories are not available. So what we proposed is the following. So we used the raw voltage trajectories and we computed the time derivative of these voltage trajectories, which uh, gives the domain where we need to approximate the dynamics of the neuron, right? So this information is crucial. So after we get this information, we can do a lot of sampling process to sample a lot of potential candidate opening and closing functions to construct activation functions and time constants, which are given in the Hodgkin-Huxley model. And we can forward simulate the gating variable trajectories to obtain a lot of candidate trajectories of gating variables. Now, we propose to use such gating variable libraries in a parametric model along with the raw voltage and current data that is available to us. And in this parametric model, theta is an unknown parameter that we want to infer. And we propose to solve a regression problem where we regress this parametric model against the computed voltage derivatives from the data that is given to us. Now here we proposed two approaches. One, we represented this parametric model as just the weighted sum of gating functions. And secondly, we also considered modeling this parameter using feed-forward neural networks. And we solved the regression problem using projection algorithm to obtain parameters of the weighted parametric model. And we solved the regression problem by computing the backpropagation error and updating based on gradients in the case of feed-forward neural networks. And both of these different models yielded a lot of candidate neuronal dynamics. And each of these neuronal dynamics, we recorded the error or the residual error of the regression problem and the condition number of the regression matrix, which informed us of the stability of the solution of the regression problem. And we found, or we used the least residual error based parameters to compute the specific conductances and reversal potentials of each of the neuron models. We then used those neuronal models and forward simulated them with different currents to obtain the frequency versus current plot, which is an important metric to evaluate the fit or the correctness of the model. So we compared the frequency versus current curve with the ground truth model and chose the one that is closest as our final result. Now, we illustrated this procedure on different types of trajectories that are available. And we tested this approach on numerical simulations, experimental data from our collaborators, and also some publicly available data sets, which are all recorded in our publication here. Now, I just wanted to give this project as a starting point to further build up towards building coupled network models. So next, the question is, if we are given trajectories of multiple neurons in a network, can we infer the coupling dynamics of this neural network, right? So this problem is called a network inference problem, and it is studied in different application domains: neural network, gene regulatory network, and chemical oscillator systems, and so on. Now, in the context of neural networks, this problem can be stated as follows. Now, given the membrane potential trajectories or spiking activity of a population of neurons, can we infer how these neurons are connected with each other? Now, this is a very active problem studied in our lab. And a couple of years back, one of my colleagues proposed this idea called ICON. And essentially, the goal of ICON, or the procedure to infer dynamics using this ICON algorithm, is to represent the coupling dynamics using a parametric form, right? If you can see in this equation, the voltage dynamics, which is represented here with V dot, is approximated as a sum of baseline dynamics, which they in fact assume that they know a priori the knowledge or the model for the baseline dynamics. And they represented the coupling dynamics in a parametric form where theta ij are unknown parameters and psi ij are orthonormal basis functions. And they essentially converted or mapped the network inference problem as a set of linear regression problems, where the goal is just to use the data from experiments and regress upon this model to find the unknown parameters theta. Now they use this algorithm on experimental data from our collaborators who work with mice to infer social synchronization in a group of mice and circadian clock networks in a network of neural systems in mice. And they published this work in 2018. Now, there were certain challenges, and I will mention them briefly in the next couple of slides. And before that, I want to ask this following question, which will be key to understanding the answer for whether we can actually build models from data, right? So can we reliably recover coupling dynamics even when the baseline dynamics is not available to us? Now, there are two important bottlenecks that I would like to highlight. And this is something common not only in dynamical systems, but it is also common in reinforcement learning algorithms. Right? In this slide, I show two figures where the bottom one corresponds to the current that is applied, and the top figure corresponds to the resulting voltage trajectories from a Hodgkin-Huxley neuron model. And here I applied 4 different perturbations or stimulation to the neuron, and I record all the 4 resulting responses from the neuron, right? And I use this parametric regression to find the models, and each of these voltage and current pair yielded different models that are recorded on the right hand side. So it is not important to know the details of these data points, but the underlying key thing to notice is each of these voltage and current pair yielded different set of models. So one of the major questions that we didn't know how to answer is how to generate data to get reliable model. Right? This is related to exploration in reinforcement learning and persistency of excitation in dynamical systems, which are very open and critical problems. And the second important challenge was ambiguity that occurred because of the parametric regression. So I will illustrate what I mean by that in this slide. So in both the projects that I presented, we represented the unknown quantities, the baseline dynamics or the coupling dynamics in a parametric form. And we chose the model that best fit the measurement data. However, this best fit model can lead to ambiguity in terms of how we interpret the contributions of coupling functions and the baseline dynamics of the system. So for example, I have 2 models at the bottom of this slide. Both are dynamic models, and we can treat both as scalar systems. So here, the blue parts, blue text highlighted in the equation correspond to baseline dynamics of the respective model, and the red colored text highlighted in both these equations correspond to baseline dynamics. Now, as you can see, there is no difference in the equations as such, right? If I am given data, I can fit models to obtain these equations. However, the difficulty is if I really want to quantify the contribution of the coupling function, I cannot do that without a priori knowledge because both these models have the best fit. They both will have same residual error, both will have same condition numbers and so on. But how do we interpret what constitutes the coupling dynamics and what constitutes the baseline dynamics of the model, right? There are other approaches typically used in the literature. One is the statistical approach, and they also have this challenge in terms of ambiguity, right? So an example, simple example is if we have 3-node network, 3-node neuron, right? And let's say the connections are given as shown in this topology, where node 1 is connected to node 2 node 2 is connected to node 3, right? If these connections are sufficiently strong, and if we use statistical metrics such as correlation or mutual information, we may end up with an inferred model that will show a connection between node 1 and 3. This is because these statistical approaches cannot distinguish a direct coupling with an indirect coupling. Here, in the original network, there is no direct coupling between node 1 and 3. Only the node 1 is connected to node 3 indirectly. However, these statistical approaches will give us a model which ambiguously interprets indirect coupling as a direct coupling. Now, why is this crucial, right? So in many applications, including circadian networks or epidemic networks and social networks, we need to identify hub cells or influential nodes, right? And this requires reliably quantifying what is the contribution just because of the coupling and what is the contribution of the system, or what is the contribution of the internal mechanisms of the system to how the system evolves with respect to time. Now, in this context, I proposed a method that systematically generates data to obtain reliable models. And I defined or proposed the learning algorithms or learning problems in which we can use these data to recover these models without ambiguity. So I will illustrate the basic idea using a simple scalar system, right? In this slide, I show a very simple scalar system. There is only baseline dynamics and control input. There is no coupling term here. Now, the question associated with a scalar system is, how can we devise a strategy to generate data from the scalar system so that I can recover the parameters alpha and beta independently? Now, to address this challenge, I propose the following idea. Right? I have a system, I can perturb it externally using some control input to generate some data. And I can repeat this, but with a different perturbation to obtain a new data. Right? And I showed that if we can do these two different experiments from the same condition, same initial condition, we can generate data such that we can recover the parameter beta just using the measured quantities, which is essentially the ratio of the instantaneous response to these different perturbations versus the two perturbations themselves. Now, we then expanded or extended this idea to network of neurons, right? And the basic idea is illustrated here with a two-node network. So if I have two nodes in a network, our method suggests that I perturb node 1, and if there is a connection between node 1 and 2, the effect of this perturbation is traversing along these connections or coupling functions modeled by K12, and it is encoded in the data measured at node 2. Similarly, we also need to perform experiment on node 2, which, if there is a connection from node 2 to node 1, the signal travels through this connection and the information is encoded in the first node. And in our paper, we derive the mathematical equation to extract this encoded information. And the basic idea is to perform such perturbation experiments in a systematic manner to extract forced data and use those data in the theory that we have developed to find the coupling strength. So, and these learning problems are based on the derived equations. And the only thing that I would like you to pay attention to in this equation is that this equation has nothing to do with the baseline dynamics of the system. Therefore, if we can generate data as prescribed, we can use this equation to unambiguously infer the effect of the coupling function. Now, we tested this on numerical simulations and we wanted to try this on experimental test bed, and we have a collaborator who works on electrochemical systems. And we requested him to generate some data to see if this is really feasible in experiments. Because in theory, we can do a lot of things, but when it comes to experiments, there are limitations and constraints. So in this slide, I just want to convey what I mean by a single perturbation experiment. So here we have an example of a two-node system where P correspond to the perturbed node and C correspond to control node. And the idea is you perturb one of the node. Let's say here in the middle figure here, it shows the perturbation applied to one of the node, and the resulting data from the two nodes is measured, which is represented here as measured potential, right? So by one experiment, we mean that you apply a control in one node and collect the resulting data from both these nodes. And these three signals are sufficient to recover the connection K to 1. Now we performed this experimental validation on multiple test cases. And here I show three simple cases to illustrate the idea. So if we perturb this two-node network, and if there is no coupling between these nodes, in the second node, we see virtually no response, which is shown here in red. And if there is a weak coupling between these two nodes, we get a weak response, which is very interesting. And if we have a strong coupling, we also have a strong response from the other node, which is also shown here, right? And we have to use this raw data and pre-process it using filter to reduce as much noise as possible. And then we can unambiguously infer the coupling strengths corresponding to all the three cases, which is, to the surprise of our experimentalist, very good. Now, the major contributions of this work was to propose an interpretable and tractable way to decouple the contributions of the baseline dynamics. So how the effect of a certain variable of interest evolves because of the coupling between other systems in the network. We also in our paper theoretically showed that this approach is robust to measurement noise, and much to the delight of many of our experimental collaborators, this informs on a very systematic data generation protocol to design experiments. And in the process, we stumbled upon a computational issue or a computational problem for which we needed to develop our own computational framework to solve regression problems associated with this. And we also experimentally validated all these results on an electrochemical system test bed, right? And we have a very interesting pipeline where we develop theory, we test this on electrochemical system, and if it is suitable for, or if we see positive results, we take it to a neural system. And now we are in the process of designing experiments to use this approach to recover SCN networks. So thus far I presented.
Vignesh?
Sure.
Yeah, Vignesh, this is Biplav. I have two questions here, if I may ask.
Sure, please.
The first question is, and this might be just my ignorance, does the coupling have to be unidirectional or can it be directional?
Oh, it can.
Bidirectional.
Let me go here.
Yeah.
It can be bidirectional.
Okay.
So, yeah. So the major difference is if the coupling is symmetric, meaning there is no directional element to the coupling, we need to perform perturbations at one node. If there is a directional coupling, meaning if there is two different ways in which the signal flows differently, we, in theory, says we need to perform two perturbations, one at node 1, one at the other node, if that makes sense.
Okay, and so you are recovering both the directions. Your method can actually, or did you experiment that, or?
Yeah. Yes, we can recover both the directions, and we can recover not only the coupling strengths but also the coupling functions in both the directions.
Okay. The other question, thank you. The second question was that what you have achieved actually seems to me is not specific to neural circuitry and the coupling, but actually something much more profound, which is that you can deduce for, say, electrical networks or other networks where you have these kind of observations. So am I correct in that understanding, or is
Yes,
this
yes.
something specific to neuroscience here?
No. So as I mentioned at the beginning, so all the theory that we develop is very general. So I explain everything in this presentation in the context of neural systems.
Perfect. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah. Okay. So far I presented an approach which could be used to infer models or connections in a network, in a nonlinear dynamic network in general, right? And in the beginning, I mentioned that I am also interested in specifically in the context of using some of these techniques in neural application. And as I also represented in one of the slides, this figure on the right that you see, it shows that there is a multiple scales in which you can investigate some of these problems in a neural systems. However, one of the challenges is the observations are much easier to obtain on a coarser level than at a molecular or individual neuronal level, right? So here we ask the question, so if I am given a population level measurement, right? We don't have measurement from each neuron, but we have a population level recording. Can we still do modeling? Can we still build models of this neural network? So that is the question that we ask here. And this is not just, again, related just to neuron, but it has multiple applications, starting from cellular populations or cellular oscillators, and to even studying migration of birds and so on, right? So, and this can be studied under ensemble control framework, which I will introduce in the next slide. Right? Ensemble systems are large populations of uncoupled or interconnected dynamical systems, and each unit in the population exhibits some variations in parameters that characterize their individual dynamics. So what I mean by that is, if I have a network or population of robotic systems, let's say I model one of the dynamics of one robot using this differential equation with some parameter beta 1. So this parameter beta 1 could model the mass of the robot, or it could be a frictional coefficient associated with some of the joints and so on, right? The basic idea of ensemble control is, in a population of similar systems, we can model different all of these systems using the same differential equations, but these differential equations vary only in the dispersion parameters beta 1, beta 2, beta n, which may all be different for different systems, right? And this can be compactly represented in the following form as shown here, where beta takes value in a compact interval, meaning the system can be infinite dimensional, meaning x here is a function in beta. It is not just a finite vector as in the case of network dynamical system. And the major feature or the major distinguishing feature of an ensemble system from a common network system is that the control input is broadcast, it is global. So you do not have the facility to manipulate each system individually. So you apply the control at a population level. Now it has its roots in quantum systems, right? So typically in nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy or imaging, we need to excite a population of spin systems using magnetic pulse, right? And it is also very relevant in brain stimulation, especially deep brain stimulation, where you modulate thousands of coupled neurons using a single or two electrode based actuation, right? Therefore, the challenges associated with studying this type of ensemble system are as follows. You can perform control or monitor these systems only at a population level, right? So when I say monitor at a population level, I mean just this. So consider a network of 500 neurons monitored over 50 milliseconds, right? Typically, the recordings that we obtain can be viewed from the top view of the figure that you see here, which looks something like this. And after some processing and spike sorting mechanisms, eventually we end up with such snapshots as shown in the bottom, right? You
So
have multiple.
what type of devices or systems used to capture this kind of data?
Oh, so this is an illustration, and this is an illustration based on our understanding that electrodes, recordings from electrodes will look like this.
But you can you or can you not record exactly this kind of thing?
Oh, we can exactly record this kind of thing according to our collaborators.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So there are two important things to notice here. Each of the snapshots that you see at the bottom are corresponding to T1, T2, T3. They are just recordings of spiking activity at each sampling time. And the two important things are the number of recorded activity in each of these sampling time will be different. So we may not be able to record all 500 neurons all the time. And the second major point is in each of these recording, we cannot associate a specific data with the system that generated it. So we cannot say this data point correspond to neuron number 300. We cannot do that. So the question is, how do we incorporate such aggregated measurement for learning models or designing controls to manipulate such population level systems? So this is a very open problem which did not have a framework to study. So I recently proposed this theoretical framework using aggregated measurement. And in the proposed approach, we consider two cases of labeled and unlabeled aggregated measurements. So the labeled aggregated measurements is, if I have these snapshots, I can pick a data point and I can confidently say that this data point came from a system that has a label of beta I. And furthermore, I can track this data point in all these snapshots. Now, this is possible in some systems where we can tag the system using some sensor or physical tag, RFID tag. And this tag will give us data points with digital signature that allows us to identify these data points with the systems, right? Here, I will just illustrate the basic idea with the labeled aggregated measurements. So in our paper, we show that if we have labeled aggregated measurement, we can compute a sequence of numbers at each sample points. We call these ensemble moments because of its close connection to moments in probability and statistics. And the question then we ask to us, given these sequence of numbers, can we use these sequences to build models or design control signals? And in our paper, we showed theoretically that if such case exists for labeled measurement, we can transform the original population system to a new system which captures the time evolution of the moments. And we show that this transformation preserves the control signals, which means if I can learn to design or manipulate the system given in the bottom, I can use the same control to manipulate the system of the original population. Right? We did that by using one of the very old theories that is available in probability statistics called Hausdorff moment problem, and we converted the static moment problem to a dynamic moment problem. And again, we showed that this preserves the control properties of the original system. Now, what is the significance of this in the context of neural systems, right? If I have a neuronal ensemble, typically what I look for is some of the models that we know, starting with physics-based model like Hodgkin-Huxley to generic model like abstract model like ECKH model, right? And given aggregated measurement data at a population level, we cannot go back to the physics-based model because we do not have measurements from each unit at every time. But in theory, we showed that we can have this aggregated measurement data to build a new model describing the time evolution of the moments induced by data. So therefore, we ignore or we omit the physics-based models and build a new data-driven model. And we can investigate modeling, analysis, and control design tasks without any model bias from the preferred physics-based model that we may use, right? This is because of the fact that from a systems theoretic viewpoint, both these models are equivalent. We can also use this to design controllers to steer the population. So in this slide, I just show a simple animation where we derived or we learned a control signal to steer a population of harmonic oscillator from an initial profile to a final profile using this measurement, which is shown here as snapshots. So we observe the snapshot and use this to design controllers. Again, I want to emphasize that these are infinite dimensional systems. There are no known analytical solutions. So we need to employ some sort of learning approach. So in summary, in this project, we established a very foundational framework to study ensemble systems. We developed a theory for the case where we have labeled as well as unlabeled measurements. So we recently also started looking at some of the reinforcement learning techniques to synthesize controllers for these classes of systems. And in particular, we are looking at applications where we can induce synchronization or desynchronization in neural population. And again, the developed theory is applicable to diverse domains. Now, in the following, I'd like to briefly summarize some of my other completed projects, and I will be happy to talk about them in detail offline after the presentation. So during my PhD, I worked on this project where our goal was to steer or control a cyber physical system. And this is a very important thrust area in many of our current funding agencies. And the basic setup of the problem is as follows. We have a control system where we have a plant which is monitored continuously by a sensor, and the sensor information is passed through a communication network to a controller. And we consider building an event triggering mechanism that monitors this sensor data and decides when to transmit this information. And in all our work, we assumed that we do not have an accurate model for the plant. So everything is based on learning and data. So what is the significance of the event or time trigger mechanism? In time trigger mechanism, the sensor information is continuously transmitted to the controller so that the network is continuously utilized. So we decided or we developed ways in which we can design this event triggering mechanism from data so that the system can be entirely autonomous. It can monitor itself, communicate whenever it is needed, and enforce control signals whenever required. And the basic principle of the proposed approach was to develop dynamic learning rules in the controller that can be implemented real time. Again, this is one of the thrust areas in many of our funding programs recently. And here we considered cases when the plant has linear dynamics, nonlinear dynamics, and also network systems. And in all our work associated with this class of problems, we proposed a theoretical framework, developed a learning algorithm, and derived conditions to ensure asymptotic convergence of the learning algorithm and stability of the closed loop system when these algorithms are implemented online in real time. So I have also worked on a project recently on a spike pattern control in a network of neurons with binary feedback. So this is a very interesting problem. So one of our collaborators asked us, so if I just give you data corresponding to spiking activity, which has zeros and ones, where zeros means there is no spike and one means there is a spike, can you design control signals to induce a desired pattern of spikes, right? So we employed again a reinforcement learning technique where I used deep neural networks along with reinforcement learning in the actor-critic formulation to synthesize control signals that can induce these specific spike patterns in neuronal models. One of the challenges of taking this approach to experiments is we need theory to back all the proposed design, and we are working currently on making sure that these things are safe so that we can take it to experimental setup. And couple of other projects that I have worked are on designing neural networks. So this is one of the projects that I recently worked with one of the graduate students in my current lab, and it deals with reservoir computing networks. So as I said, my role is I am a dynamical systems guy, so I bring a dynamical systems perspective to this project, where I developed a realization theory, which is a theory in dynamical systems. I brought this theory to reservoir computing networks so that we can design tractably some of the hyperparameters of the reservoir networks. And we showed that this can be used in data integrated control schemes, and also it can be used to handle time series data in medical and health informatics. And another project that deals with computational neural network is cooperative deep learning mechanism that we recently submitted to transactions of neural network. And the basic idea of this project was to develop a cooperative two neural network update strategy, where one neural network acted as a target and other neural network acted as a queue network alternatively, so that we can update these two networks simultaneously. So the major advantage or the rationale behind this proposed framework was that we expected that this framework will improve the sample efficiency of the algorithm, so that we can use reduced buffer size to employ experience replay strategies. And we did find that this indeed was the improvement that we achieved through this framework. And in this paper, we also developed exploratory error-driven update rules, where we avoid using gradients in the update rule. And of course, we have some theoretical convergence proof to back our update rules. So in summary, I have worked on these research thrusts with many other projects, many of the projects in all these research thrusts, and they are all supported by different funding agencies. And in the last year, I have also worked with my postdoctoral mentor to write some of these grants, contribute to some of these grants, especially in NSF and NIH and Air Force. So far I have presented whatever I have done during my PhD and some of my current work. So in the following, I'll present a couple of my future research projects that I am interested to pursue. The first one pertains to expanding the moment-based method that I recently developed to diverse applications. In particular, I'm excited about the applications where we have feedback literally in the form of images, not data exact measurements of physical quantities, but images. And this project actually is very interesting because it involves a lot of interdisciplinary work. So we need to do image processing, followed by some statistics to compute sample moments. And then we have to incorporate some learning mechanism to construct the moment system, and then some control theory to design controllers. And it has applications in robotic systems, where we have images, GPS images, or visual feedback to monitor a swarm of robots. And it has also applications in neural networks, where typically we have our collaborators recording videos of spiking activity, and we want to incorporate that in the closed loop fashion. One of the other projects that I'm very interested in is this cyber physical social system, and the title is inspired by one of the thrust areas of AI Institute. But the problem is actually in my mind for over a year now. So typically in securing dynamical system, people study this problem, where in a control loop, if there is an adversarial interaction, the goal is to detect the adversarial interaction, identify the source of the interaction, and try to mitigate them. And I am interested in developing this to a ensemble system, which I think is possible with the moment-based method that I proposed. And one of the very interesting applications of this is to model this ensemble system in the opinion network dynamics using models such as bounded confidence model, right? So this, in this context, right, if we consider attack, this translates literally to misinformation, right? And this misinformation should be detected, and it should be the source of it should be identified, and they should be mitigated in order to make sure the opinions are not corrupted by misinformation. And I am really excited about this application domain. The third project that I am currently looking into and would like to pursue further is building dynamic models, especially behavioral models from data, to uncover some underlying mechanism. And it has a lot of theoretical as well as application-driven questions. The theoretical questions are, what are the fundamental limits in modeling and controlling such populations using aggregated measurement? And can we build such dynamical models when the network structure is changing? And last, the project that I want to mention is on dynamic data analysis. In our paper on reservoir computing networks, we showed that the network can be trained to learn the underlying dynamics from EEG data, which it can reproduce or forecast. And we want to expand or extend this approach to handle time series data with irregularities. And what I mean by irregularity is illustrated in the figure at the top. So where the data is missing in some of the time intervals. And we want to use this reservoir network to recover these missing data. And it has applications in public data sets where there are a lot of cases where we have irregularities in the temporal domain. So I'd like to acknowledge some of the contributions of my colleagues and lab mates. And all my projects related to cyber physical systems are collaboratively done with my doctoral advisor, Dr. Jagannathan. And my ensemble control problems are done with Dr. Jirshan Lee, who is my postdoctoral mentor. And the chemical experiment test bed is done in collaboration with Dr. Eastman, who is in St. Louis University. And all my neuroscience problems are done in collaboration with Dr. Shinam, who is also in WashU. I would also like to thank and acknowledge the contributions and grants provided by the funding agencies, without which all this work would not be possible. And finally, I'd like to conclude by once again thanking all of you for joining this presentation, and I will be happy to take questions.
Fantastic. All right, guys, colleagues, questions? This really well put and presented talk. Thank you.
So, Vignesh, I had a question about this direct versus indirect connections and how you had that chain of 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
And how sometimes there would be some connection between 1 and 3, even though it didn't exist. I was wondering, is this related to causality? So if you wanted to do something with causality, could you apply these techniques?
So, yeah, so that is, again, one of the statistical metrics that is used to infer causal networks. And let me get back here just a second. Okay, so in statistical approaches, typically they involve statistical metrics like correlation, mutual information, or Granger's causality condition, and so on, right? All these techniques, they measure in a way the statistical properties of the different signals from different nodes. And each of these signals have some correlation in a way because they are indirectly coupled, right, in the chain network. And therefore, even when there is no direct coupling, if we use any of these statistical approaches, we will get indirect couplings inferred as direct couplings. And this is still a problem in inferring causal models. Therefore, they impose some specific constraints in the inferring procedure. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, and then with the circadian rhythms that you have, so this SCN is usually known as the master clock that regulates the circadian rhythms throughout different tissues in your body. So I was wondering, was this applied to the circadian rhythms in that way, like seeing the SCN actually being the master clock, like inferring that?
Yes, yeah, we want to do that. So this is the motivation for us to develop this perturbation approach, right? So one of the things that we learned from experimenting this on chemical test bed is that the proposed method is very reliable, but it requires some experimental modifications, meaning traditionally even in our chemical collaborators lab, they don't do experiments in the way that we proposed. So they have to make some arrangements to be able to perform this experiment, logistical arrangements, right? Now we want to expand this idea to actually to take it to biological systems, and in particular SCN networks. And it is not, so in theory, we can do a lot of things. So in experiments, they need to do a lot of planning. So now we are in the process of planning these experiments, and our trajectory is definitely towards that goal.
Okay, thank you. And I had one other question. Your talk was very interesting. So with the deep Q networks you had, and
yeah.
you had this one network was the target network, and then I believe the other network you were currently training. So how does this differ from the standard DQN of having like some target network that you update every number of iterations? Are you like learning how often to update the target network, or is there something else going on?
Oh, so we are using these two networks, target and Q networks, and updating them in a way called consensus-based updates. So we want them to move towards the same weights. So we found that if we do that, this improves the robustness of the learning algorithm, and we also see that it decreases the memory buffer that is required to update to perform experience replay. Typically, we show that in fact there is a significant reduction in the memory buffer required when compared to the DQ1.
Okay.
So it doesn't significantly improve the final result. It has same result, but the advantage that we get is in terms of saving resources in terms of the memory. Right? So that is one of the major things that we see in all the Atari game experiments that we conducted.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you. I'd certainly like to talk to you more about that later.
Oh, thank you.
Vignesh, this is Mike Hunes. Much of your work has focused on systems where there's an underlying physics model or mathematical model. And that's sort of the basis for the dynamical systems that you've worked on. At times there are things like perceptual problems where there's not good mathematics or physics available. And you've tried to sort of bridge this by working from the molecular level to the neuronal level to collections of neurons where you have collections of dynamical systems and ensembles. And so you've done a sort of a good job of bridging from where there's good models and where there may not be. There's sort of a third level, which is in a third way of modeling things, which is a knowledge level. And so you might, and in fact, the AI Institute has done quite a bit of work on sort of the bridge between the knowledge level and the purely perceptual machine learning model. But there's not been a good bridge sort of between the dynamical model and the knowledge level. And so you might consider that as part of your future plans. And in particular, you show a picture that has that ranges from the molecular level up to the brain level, which is, you know, you said the course level. Yeah, that's the picture. Sort of one higher level between the brain level is multiple brains. And that's an area that I'm interested in, having a basis in multi-agent systems. but there's not so many multiple brains where you can deal with them statistically, like your huge population of robots all moving in synchrony. There might just be a small number, and brains at that level communicate at the knowledge level, not statistically. So this is not, in fact, this is not a question at all. It's a suggestion for maybe some interesting future projects. And also ways of bridging what goes on at the AI Institute and what goes on at the Neuroscience Center.
Yes, so this is really interesting. I would really like to learn more about the knowledge systems or knowledge level models in general. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, I think as a complement to the statistical and the signal things, there is a possibility of increasingly utilizing what you already know about the subject matter, the brain, whatever it is, and that can further improve upon. There's a lot of I think discussion now on incorporating explicit knowledge into these learning systems, which so far not much has been done, but we redo some of the work in that area.
Yes.
Okay, great. Kaushik, you still want to ask the question, or are you okay? Okay, with that, I think go ahead.
I had a question. Sorry, Vignesh, I was late. I was in another meeting. I saw sprinkled on your presentation on the parts that I attended references to robotic systems, and I don't know if you spoke about it earlier, but could you give a brief overview of what robotic systems you have worked with and what was done on them?
I see. Okay. Let me go back here. So I have worked on specifically these three setups: robotic manipulators with fixed joint, not flexible joints, and quadrotors and consensus-based formation controls. So in particular, all these three systems, I have worked on projects to develop control synthesis strategies from data without starting from a model. We start from data to try and design controllers. And especially the quadrotor system, I worked with one of my graduate students or colleague from my lab during my PhD to implement them on a Pixhawk test bed, Pixhawk controller.
I see. Do you, from a philosophical point of view, when we have robots when we have physical devices that they actually interact with the environment, there are hard decisions to be made. Like, if your quadrotor goes and smashes into something, that is a catastrophic failure. And a neural network type of architecture maybe doesn't go that much. Like, it could have had enough things firing saying, oh yeah, that's the way you should go. But, like a simple controller that says, proximity to an obstacle is giving you a repulsive force that goes to infinity. Stop, you're not going there. What are your thoughts on this topic?
Yes, that is true. So I should have also mentioned that all these applications that I have worked on were on implementing things in real time, right? If we want to do this on real time from data, it is very, very challenging to account for all the potential mishaps that could happen in real time due to the environmental interaction, right? So in that case, my opinion is if we have to account for all these things, we cannot easily start from real-time implementation purely from data. We need to have a priori knowledge of some of the possible constraints and intrusions that the environment may impose on the controller. And if we have such information, we could potentially avoid getting into catastrophic failure scenarios. And that is my understanding and opinion about this topic.
Okay, cool. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
All right. Well, I think it's the right time to conclude this talk, and hope we are Vignesh meeting with the search committee at 2 o'clock. And you have the link, and hope you'll have more conversations with some of the colleagues here, and we'll continue the conversations. Thank you all the colleagues for joining, and
thank you.
Feel free to send me or Michael some feedbacks. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Vignesh. Really enjoyed the talk.
Thank you. Bye.